Good morning, students. So today I am going to discuss about the cell theory. Already you have learned that cell is the basic fundamental unit of life. Cell is called as the structural and the functional unit of life. So let us see what is cell theory. Come to the next page. Here a name is written, Hans and Zacharias Janssen. Who is this man? Zacharias Janssen was the man who invented the microscope, simple microscope, in 1595. So in 1595 he invented the microscope, and from that onward the people were able to see the minute organism in the microscope. So Robert Hooke, who invented the cell, while examining the cross section of the cork found in the bark, used this microscope, the simple microscope. So many scientists contributed to the cell theory. So first was the Robert Hooke in 1665 identified the cell. How he invented the cell? While he was examining the thin section of cork. What is cork? Found in the bark of trees. And he, using the simple microscope, he observed a mass of empty hexagonal chambers like a honeycomb in which the honeybees store the honeys, and he called them as cell. Cell in the Latin word means a little room. In 1674, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, he observed the living cells. So in 1665, Robert Hooke invented the dead cells, whereas in 1674, Anton van Leeuwenhoek invented the living cells. And he found that with the help of his lenses, he used the better lenses, and he observed the living cells. And he was the first person to identify the microorganism also. So from 1674, the cell was called as the living cells. Later on in 1838, the Schleiden, that is Matthias Schleiden, he noted that plants are made of cells. And after 1 year in 1839, that is Theodore Skevan, he invented that all living things are made of cells. And after that, both Schleiden and Skevan combinedly proposed the cell theory. And what was the cell theory? They told that cell theory, that means all the living organisms are made up of one or more cells and all look alike. A cell is the smallest basic unit of structural and the organization in organism. But later on in 1855, Virchow proposed the cell which comes from other cells. So that's why the Schleiden, Skevan and Virchow, they proposed the cell theory. Now come to the next page, cell theory. Here the triangle is seen, here Schleiden, Skevan and Virchow. The cell theory summarizes these observations and has three main principles. Number one, all organisms are composed of one or more cells. Number two, the cell is the basic unit of structure and organization of organisms. And number three, all cells come from pre-existing cells. So first and the second point has been proposed by Schleiden and Skevan, and the third theory was proposed by Virchow. So combinedly it is called as the cell theory. Now come to the page number 111. It is given there, the cell theory. So at the same time that the invention of the telescope made the space accessible to human observation, the microscope opened up smaller world, showing what living organisms were composed of. It was first observed and named by Robert in 1665. So Hooke observed the cross section of this cork cell. See this cork cells, how it looks like. It looks like the chamber-like structures, the hexagonal chambers-like structures which he resembles it as the honeycomb. So he observed the cross section of a cork and noted that it looks strangely similar to the cellula. Cellula means small rooms. in which the monks inhabited. Monks, in Hindi we say that sadhu or bhikshu. They live in the small rooms where the monks or the nuns live. They are called as cellula, and thus deriving the name. However, what Hooke saw were the dead cells, wall of the plant cell. So Robert Hooke, when he invented the cell, was not the living cell but the dead cells. The first man to observe a living cell under a microscope was Anton van Leeuwenhoek in 1674. 1674. Now, formulation of the cell theory, how the cell theory was proposed. Later on in 1838, Theodor Skevan and Matthias Cleiden. Theodor Skevan was the geologist and the Matthias Cleiden was the botanist. So Matthias Cleiden first proposed that the plant is made up of the living cell, and later on after 1 year the Theodor Skevan proposed that all animals are also made up of living cells, and both proposed and both were enjoying the dinner and talking about their studies on cell. So they were struck with the similarities of the characteristics of the cell in plants studied by Cleiden and animal cells by Skevan. And after that, the cell theory was proposed. Now come to the next page. So later their observations were summarized in the cell theory. So the theory states all living things are made of one or more cells. A cell is the smallest basic unit of structure and the organization in organism, and all cells arise from pre-existing. This was proposed by Virchow, another biologist who modified the cell theory. M.G. Cleiden and Theodor Skevan. So both they proposed the living things are made up of one or more cells, and a cell is the smallest basic unit of structure and organization in organism. But Virchow modified the cell theory, and that's why we say there are the three main points related to the cell theory. So that is about the cell theory. So checkpoint is given. What is cell theory? Cell theory was proposed by M.G. Cleiden and Theodor Skevan, and according to the cell theory, all living things are made up of cells, one or more cells, and cell is the smallest basic unit of structure and organization in organism. So that will be the cell theory. What are the postulates of the cell theory? The postulate of cell theory was that number one, all living things are made up of one or more cells. Number two, cell is the smallest basic unit, structural and the functional unit. Number three, all cells arise from pre-existing cells. So that is the postulate of the cell theory. Who coined the cell theory? M.G. Cleiden and Theodor Skevan. Which scientist observed cells for the first time? So first is not written. That is Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke was the first scientist who observed the cell. So checkpoint you will write, and that's all for today.